You need to have your parents close to you because of some of the developments that we've seen and some of the changes that we've seen in the composition of the labor pool, especially with millions of moms who were forced to drop out of the workforce because of virtual learning and all this. So I guess that brings us back to the pandemic and how that has amplified, accelerated, decelerated trends that you had seen in demographics and housing.
Yeah. The first thing, the thing that is very obvious to anyone who's paying attention is that you had a lot of movement of households, particularly those looking for space, whether that's somebody who was in a multifamily unit, particularly urban core, that wanted space. So that means moving to that suburban area. And a lot of the migration data that you can look at, whether it's post office or some of the work that the Fed has done, it shows that the vast majority of urban departures are to that same metro area, to the suburban areas up there. So it wasn't a situation of the New Yorker picking up and moving to Austin as much as it was the New Yorker picking up and moving to New Jersey or Long Island or Westchester.
And I'm going to interrupt you one more time here. Zelman Associates has done extraordinary work about what you just mentioned. And I think there's a big misperception out there that a lot of Americans uprooted and moved halfway across the country.
No, I think there's certainly some of that, especially among younger cohorts that maybe didn't have a core base of where they were living. But especially when you think about families, there's no question that there was that push to the suburbs, and you saw this explosion in a lot of these suburban markets around urban areas. So that's very visible. I think it's debatable of how much of that was local versus across state borders. That's where maybe the conversation gets more fun. But when you think about housing as a whole, what I think the pandemic really did on the margin was it destroyed incremental housing or household formation. Now, most of the government data on this topic is very volatile. There's a lot of surveys the government produces that people use to try to estimate household formation, which is essentially the change in households. It's the incremental number of households coming to market. And household means if you weren't a household before and you became one on your own, that's household formation. That's you moving out of your parents and being independent. It's you moving away from college and being independent, or two roommates splitting up and both of them having their own. That's all household formation. If you think about the pieces during the pandemic, young adults moved back home at a pretty rapid clip. And while they've started to reverse that, the share of young adults living at home today is still higher than in 2019, same time. And that's across all the young cohorts. So young adults have actually been a headwind in that regard. There's 2 million fewer young adults employed today, around 48 million, than pre-pandemic. It was close to 50 million. So you can kind of understand on the margin why you'd have more young adults living at home. It's hard to underwrite that and say, well, that was a catalyst for household formation. So the young piece, I feel pretty confident saying that's kind of net household destruction that we had from the pandemic. You think about deaths, you obviously had more people die than normal. And if you roll that through, you had about 600,000 excess deaths in 2020. You're probably going to be closer to 450, 500 this year. That's incrementally a 300,000 to 400,000 household unit drag. So more people on average, as you run that through house headship rates, understand how those people are living. And then immigration. Immigration is typically a huge impact on incremental population growth and household demand. And you know that immigration was down massively in 2020 and is still down significantly this year. So you take each of those pieces and you say, well, it's very hard to argue that you actually created housing demand during the pandemic. It's very easy to say you destroyed it on the margin. Not to say you didn't have household formation, but you had a lot less than what the trend line was. The perception is that, well, clearly the pandemic was great for housing and household formation. It was great for home sales, and it was great for second homes. But when we're trying to get at core demographically driven primary demand, it was actually a net negative.